Legends of Origin, Book 2, Orion's Harvesters, Chapter 1. Varric Altard ran his hand over the ancient weapon's smooth copper surface, lifting his gaze to where it rose to almost touch the cavern's 7-story-high ceiling and visualizing the old-fashioned gears inside its cylindrical body. All he could see of it from ground level was its thick copper casing, thicker than 4 men standing side by side, rising into blackness. He had done enough maintenance work on the flat, round dish at its tip to visualize the DNA helix-like structure that rose from the dish and from which unbounded energy would be discharged when it was fired. He pitied anyone at which the weapon was aimed. It was said to boast at least 3 times the power of a nuclear one. Only a select group knew of its existence, and most of that group's members didn't know its location. The world would soon know both those things, when Varric and his brothers turned on the giant machine and used it against their enemies. It had been a long time coming, and they were all as relieved as they were terrified. Their enemy was not one to be trifled with, but neither were they. Their ancestors had warned them that they would be left with no choice but to fight, and they already knew the truth in that, because everything else their ancestors had predicted up until this date, 21 December 2012, had come to pass. They had to strike first, or they wouldn't stand a chance. Varric and his brothers suspected their enemy was responsible for the recent spate of baby killings across the planet, and were eager to be rid of them once and for all. Perhaps with their precious masters defeated, they would lose the will to follow any who came after. It wasn't as if Varric and the others were completely innocent of wrongdoing, or anywhere close to it in some cases. But none would murder a defenseless baby. The fact that their enemies were slaying babies in preparation for their master's coming instilled a greater itch than usual to get it over with and kill the lot of them. Varric hoped the added eagerness wouldn't cause fatal mistakes in judgment on their part. Cold, dark eyes marked by stress lines looked back at Varric when he stared at his reflection in the weapon's surface. Stubble covered his chin, and unruly brown hair that was too long for his liking rested on his shirt collar. He needed a break. Badly. He hoped he might be able to retire by the time this was over, though a horrible clenching in his gut told him the fun would only just begin once the long-awaited enemy was overcome, or at least chased away. Others would follow, and then what? They would not be as easily defeated without the benefit of surprise. That was assuming it would be easy the first time. A moving shadow reflected in the weapon's shiny surface caught Varric's attention. Intense survival training kept him physically relaxed, so as not to alert the intruder that his presence was known, though Varric's mind was anything but relaxed. It wasn't one of his brothers. None of the other 9 who knew the weapon's hiding place were scheduled to be there, and they would have announced themselves if they had come for some reason. He casually reached beneath his black leather jacket for the knife sheathed on his jeans belt. Slight relief passed over him when his fingers closed over the reassuring coldness of the weapon's smooth hilt. Varric watched the reflected shadow as it drew closer behind him. There was only one lot of people who would dare attack one of Varric's kind. Only one who could possibly have discovered this place. A deluded group that believed the enemy was a savior and who would stop at nothing to destroy the ancient weapon. The baby killers. Varric frowned. He'd been certain he hadn't been followed, but how else could the intruder have found the place? Had his exhaustion made him careless? 3 pieces away. 2. 1. Varric slid the knife from its sheath and spun to face the intruder, thrusting the long blade upwards through his hooded attacker's ribcage and into his heart. The intruder's dagger clattered to the ground as he stared wide-eyed at Varric, and then he dropped when Varric yanked out the knife. He bent and turned the dead man onto his back. Bruises and cuts covered the blonde intruder's knuckles. A man clearly used to violence. Varric shook his head. Had they really thought it would be that easy to kill a warrior monk? A search of the black-clothed intruder's pockets revealed nothing of interest. The blond man's double-edged blade, however, told Varric exactly who he was and what his purpose had been. Varric pressed a small knob where the hilt met the blade, and a sharp spike shot from the hilt's end and opened into a miniature grappling hook with 8 piercing prongs, intended to rip victims' flesh as it was pulled out. Varric winced at the thought. The black and red hilt was made of a substance he recognized as magicalite, not found naturally on planet Earth. Varric's lips curled in distaste as he stood over the corpse of a man who had probably murdered babies. He sheathed his knife and walked behind the ancient weapon, where an internal phone hung on the wall. He pushed 3 numbers for the extension he wanted. Fellow warrior monk Jacques de Tremblay answered on the second ring. "They've found it," Varric said. "What? Where are you?" "Standing over the body next to the weapon." Jacques was silent for a moment. "Just one?" Unease creeping up his spine, Varric glanced around the shadowy cavern, his eyes lingering on the dark corners where the wall's torches' light failed to reach. "Perhaps," he hesitated. "Probably not." "You know what this means," Jacques said. "Yes. Gather the others and fill them in on the way here." "Give us half an hour." "I'm not sure we have that long." Varric hung up and scanned the cavern again. The wannabe assassin had surely not been foolish enough to come alone, nor would his superiors have given the order to do so. It was too much to hope that the blond man had disobeyed orders. Others would come, if they hadn't already. Varric strode over to the far wall and waded into the shallow pool that lined it without bothering to remove his shoes or roll up his jeans. He doubted he had time for luxuries like dry clothes. When he reached the wall, he grasped a lever designed to look like a rock protrusion and pulled down, opening a hidden panel from where he could control the underground complex's doors. He pushed a few buttons on the panel, shutting the mountaintop entrance's second defense door. He didn't bother closing the first door, since anyone who might already be inside obviously knew how to open it. Now his enemies were either trapped inside with him, or would have to waste time trying to find another entrance, and it was doubtful they'd get that far, since the only other entrance was deep inside Varric's headquarters, at least a kilometer below the cavern, and an intruder would have to get past a few thousand warrior monks to get to Varric via that route. Jacques and his brothers were in the control room below, but the tunnels leading to the ancient weapon were well hidden and did not lead directly to it. Though Jacques knew the way, it was filled with traps he would have to stop and disable in order to pass, which would delay him considerably. Whoever's turn it was to guard the machine usually entered through the secret tunnel via the mountaintop, where there were no traps, but the way was barred by a thick steel door that required fingerprint and retina identification. The high-tech entrance security was courtesy of an old friend who had since gone into hiding to avoid being imprisoned for its theft. Sadly, before he'd had a chance to install modern lighting, too. To reach the entrance, one had to hike a few kilometers to the mountain's edge, then climb down a few meters. The headquarters' only other exit was on the mountaintop, too far away from the mountain face entrance for Jacques to use it to reach Varric in time, if the enemy was already inside. Varric pushed a few more buttons and another panel slid open. This one set deeper into the rock face to make room for the security monitors it contained. He scanned the tunnel network leading to the weapon cavern. Every tunnel was empty, save for the shadows cast by the wall's torches' flickering flames. On one of the screens, a larger shadow flickered briefly as it passed over a security camera 2 passages away. Varric tensed. There was still a chance the intruder would turn down a wrong tunnel. Please God. Another shadow blurred past the camera. Then another. Varric scanned the other screens again. It seemed there were only 3 more harvester lovers to do away with. He realized with relief that it must be a scouting party that had perhaps only just found the weapon. They may not even have had time to advise their superiors yet. Please God. Varric waded out of the water and removed his shoes to avoid the noise they'd make as he walked. He was quicker on his feet barefoot anyway. He moved around the cavern, extinguishing all the torches except those near the entrance. His enemy had no way of knowing how well lighted the cavern usually was, so the lack of light was unlikely to draw suspicion. He moved back to the corpse and dragged it closer to the entrance, leaving it shrouded in darkness. Hopefully, at least one of the intruders would trip over it and even the odds, even if only for a few seconds. He slipped into the shadows near the entrance, pressed his back against the cold, uneven wall, unsheathed his knife, and waited. Jacques and the others would not arrive in time. The fight was Varric's alone, and planet Earth could not afford for him to lose. Varric's keen senses alerted him to shadows near the cavern's entrance as they shifted so slightly that most would have assumed it to be a trick of light. Keeping himself calm and focused with long, deep breaths, he watched. A few seconds later, perhaps having assumed the cavern was devoid of life, the first intruder moved partially into the light, scanning the interior before motioning to his comrades to follow. All 3 black-clothed, hooded intruders stepped fully into the light as they moved into the cavern a few paces from Varric's hiding place. They gazed around, probably looking for anything that might look like the ancient weapon, though they didn't have a clue what it looked like, as far as Varric knew. Without the light, it would remain hidden unless they literally walked into it. Varric intended to make sure they didn't get that close. The fact that the intruders exposed their position for so long displayed an annoying cocksureness, though Varric told himself it could just be that they thought their friend had already investigated this cavern and moved on. The monk's hopes rose. With a little luck, they wouldn't deem it necessary to wander around in the dark and would just leave. Then he could follow them on camera until Jacques and the others arrived. As much as he was willing to fight them, he wasn't convinced he could win. 3 against 1. As well-trained and capable as Varric was, he knew the harvester lovers were equally so. The 3 men spread out, 2 stopping at the light's edge and the third blending into the darkness as he walked towards Varric. The monk held his breath and tensed, ready to slash the intruder's vocal cords before he could cry out. They were about the same size, so, with a little luck and a few answered prayers, Varric could possibly down the man without a sound, leaving his 2 comrades none the wiser to his fate. The man stopped, so close to Varric that the monk could feel his presence, like some dark, looming something that one tried to avoid even though you knew it was impossible. Boots scuffed rock as the man turned and walked back into the lighted area. Varric let out a slow breath. "There's nothing here," the man whispered. "Let's try further down the passage." "Then why's this entrance lighted?" another asked. "Stupid." Varric would have been better off leaving the cavern in complete darkness. What a stupid mistake to make when mistakes could least be afforded. In a dark cavern, he would have had another much-needed advantage over them too, since his eyes would have had time to adjust to the dark by the time they arrived. The first speaker surveyed the darkness. "Who knows? To throw intruders off the trail, maybe. Yes, think that, you rotten excuse for a human. Where's Dez? The third asked. So that was the dead guy's name. Probably realized there's nothing here and moved on. The third man raised an eyebrow. We've come too far not to be thorough. Varric groaned inwardly. Too many harvester lovers were the real deal, too dedicated to their twisted cause to be lazy in their search for the ultimate weapon. Typical that he'd be stuck with these, rather than the type who merely played the part due to their love of being a part of something secret. The men each grabbed a torch from the wall, leaving only one to light the entrance. Cold sweat stuck Varric's dark blue shirt to his back as he realized what a fool he'd been to leave 4 torches burning. Now they would probably see him the moment they neared. He pressed his back harder against the rocky wall, sucking in his stomach as the light swept too close for comfort. His knife's blade scraped against the rock. Another mistake. God help me. The 3 intruders spun in Varric's direction, peering into the darkness. Thankfully, the way noises echoed in the cavern, it wasn't clear to them exactly where the sound had come from, and they moved slightly to his right, hooked knives at the ready. If just one of those hooks sank into the wrong body part, he was as good as dead. He expected a pleasant afterlife, but wasn't ready to claim it yet. Too afraid to wipe sweaty palms on his jeans, lest the movement give away his position, Varric watched the men reach the wall and fan out along it, 2 heading right for him. The warrior monk steeled himself. 5 more steps and he'd be exposed. 4 more steps. 3 more. Varric took a deep, calming breath. 2 more. He gripped his knife harder. God help me. 1 more. Varric stepped forward and slammed his fist into the intruder's Adam's apple. The man made a strangled sound as he doubled over, clutching his throat, his dagger and the torch falling with a clatter. His comrades turned at the noise as Varric stepped back, away from the torch's dimming flame. The 2 intruders raced to the wheezing man, who pointed at Varric. The 2 dashed towards him, and he tensed, ready for action. There was no way out of this now. It was either fight or flee through the entrance behind him and hope he'd delayed them long enough for Jacques and his brothers to have arrived. And Varric had never been one to run like a coward, not even when doing so was more common sense than cowardice. The first attacker reached Varric and swept his dagger towards the monk's abdomen, hilt first. The bastard wanted to gut him. Varric leaped back and darted to the side. Jacques and the others couldn't be more than 10 minutes away now. The fight would be over by then. The 2 attackers closed in on Varric from either side. Do or die. Varric feinted to the left, then ducked to the right under the taller attacker's arm, the man's blade missing his ear by millimeters. He spun around as he came up behind the man and shoved him away, then sprang at his comrade and slashed his cheek before spinning out of reach again with the aid of some fancy footwork. He had to wear them down and try to keep at least one alive for questioning. The man whose cheek Varric had cut sprang at him, dagger sweeping towards his wrist in an attempt to sever the tendons that allowed him to grip his weapon. Varric danced back and around him, maintaining the distance between them with ease. The tall one rushed Varric, who stood his ground this time. The attacker's dagger arced toward Varric's abdomen, again hilt first. The bastards are determined to gut me. Varric grasped the intruder's dagger hand in a wrist lock and spun along the outside of the man's arm, his back to the other man, forcing his opponent to turn with him or accept a broken wrist. The motion brought them face to face again, and Varric twisted the dagger from his opponent's hand just as the torch the man held came crashing into the side of his head. Varric staggered back, keeping his grasp on both his and his attacker's blades. He swept out both, ignoring his spinning vision and focusing on his sense of hearing instead, as he'd been trained to do if visually impaired during a fight. Someone approached from the left. Varric lashed out with the hooked dagger hilt first. It sank into soft flesh, and he pressed the knob to release the hook. The soft, Velcro-like sound of tearing flesh filled his ears, and a satisfying shriek echoed through the cavern as Varric jumped back and ripped the hook from whatever body part it had sunk into. 2 down, 1 to go. The remaining intruder's dagger swept towards Varric's jugular, and he dived into a side roll, came to his feet, and spun to face his foe in one fluid movement. The attacker came at him just as Varric perceived stealthy movement from behind. The man whose throat he had hit earlier clearly wasn't as incapacitated as Varric had hoped. Varric launched himself to the side. The 2 attackers advanced without pause, keeping him trapped between them. Varric lashed out with both knives to keep them from getting too close, backing towards their comrade's corpse. When his heel touched it, he moved to the side and back, hoping Throat Guy would trip over it. The 2 attackers glanced at each other, then both leaped at Varric, murderous intent so clear in their eyes that Varric imagined he could smell the sourness of it in their sweat. Movement caught Varric's eye as the 3rd intruder joined his 2 friends. Shit. Clearly, the hook hadn't done any serious damage. Throat Guy exclaimed as he stumbled over the corpse, but he managed to keep his balance. Varric sprang forward and cut off the exclamation with a swift kick to Throat Guy's face that dropped him, hopefully for good this time. He spun in time to deflect a stab between his shoulder blades and slashed at his attacker's dagger wrist. The man hissed as Varric's blade found its target, and the offending dagger clattered to the ground. Varric whirled to face the 3rd intruder, arms sweeping out horizontally in an attempt to keep his attacker at bay. He blinked sweat from his eyes as he closed in on the enemy, no longer focused on defense. The man's eyes flickered to something behind Varric just as a strong arm wrapped around his throat and tried to yank him back. Varric bent his knees and threw himself forward and down, his back curved and arms extended. Just before his hands touched the ground, he drew back his arms, stretching them out behind him. The attacker flew over his head and crashed into his comrade, sending them both tumbling. Varric rose from the crouch and dashed to the intruders as they struggled to untangle themselves. He threw the hooked dagger into the darkness and grasped the closest man's hair, yanking back his head to expose his throat. He drew the blade across the tender flesh and stepped back as blood spurted from the mortal wound and the enemy drew his last breaths. His blood-soaked comrade rolled away and rose to his feet, eyeing Varric warily. Varric had killed 2 of the 4 intruders, probably 3 if his kick had been as well placed as he intended. This one had to live. It was vital they discover how many others knew the weapon's location. Varric glanced to his right at the entrance, and the intruder followed his gaze. Understanding flickered in his eyes, and Varric assumed he realized help was on the way. In a group attack, negotiation was rarely possible. But one-on-one, it was time to try, though Varric doubted he'd get it right unless the man before him was a coward at heart. Harvester lovers were known for their utter loyalty to others of their kind. "There's nowhere left to go," Varric said. "The main entrance has been sealed. Surrender now, and we may let you live." The intruder snarled, "Join us, and our masters may have mercy on you when they return." Varric sneered. "I want no mercy from that lot. It would surely stain my soul forever." "Then die by my hand." "I'll pass on that too." Varric launched himself at the intruder, blade arcing toward the man's dagger wrist. The enemy jumped back, turning in his hand so Varric's blade sliced the outside of his wrist instead, leaving a thin trail of blood glistening in the flickering torchlight. They edged around each other, each searching for a weakness in the other's defense. "This is pointless," Varric said. "My brothers will be here at any moment. If 3 of you couldn't kill one of us, how do you hope to kill a group of us by yourself?" Desperation glimmered in the intruder's eyes, and, in that moment, Varric learned something new about the enemy. Failure to fulfill a task ended in death, or perhaps worse, even if they escaped unscathed to return to their comrades. Varric said, "You side with those who would turn on their own followers. Where is the sense in that?" "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't I?" Varric advanced. "It's not too late to change sides." "Shut up!" the intruder snarled, then charged Varric. Varric skipped to the side and thrust his blade towards the attacker's dagger wrist again. The man twisted out of the way, and the blade sank into his forearm. Soundlessly, he lunged at Varric, his dagger glancing off Varric's wrist, deep enough to hurt, and bleed a lot, but not enough to loosen his grip on the weapon. Varric focused on slow, steady breaths. "Come on, Jacques." The intruder lunged again. Varric stepped into the attack and slammed his fist into his attacker's Adam's apple. The man doubled over and backed away, clutching his throat. Varric came at him again and kicked him in the side of the head. Sharp pain lanced his calf as the attacker's blade sliced into it. Varric sprang back, testing his injured leg. He could still put full weight on it. "Don't make me kill you," he pleaded with the man. "I won't enjoy it." He meant it, too. Despite the fact that he was, in effect, a trained killing machine, he loathed the act of taking a life. The intruder croaked, "Then give up now." He straightened, preparing for another attack. Varric grimaced and dropped to a crouch as the attacker came near. He scythed out his leg, and the man stumbled, but regained his balance quickly. Varric sprang forward and kicked. His foot connected with his attacker's kneecap with a satisfying crunch, and the man fell with a cry of agony. Varric ran behind the intruder and wrapped an arm round his throat, squeezing off his oxygen supply until the man slumped against him, unconscious. Varric shoved away the man, stood, chest heaving, and moved to the other 2 prone intruders. Both were agreeably dead. "You should know better than to turn your back on an entrance." Varric spun, ready to face yet more harvester lovers, his brain not quite registering why the voice sounded so familiar. He relaxed when Jacques stepped into the light, followed by 20 other warrior monks whose names Varric knew without looking at their faces, for they'd been selected as the weapon's first line of defense before their births, just as he'd been chosen as one of the few trusted to guard the weapon. Jacques and Varric clasped each other at the elbow in greeting, and Jacques surveyed the cavern as their brothers lighted the wall torches. Varric pointed at the unconscious harvester lover. "That one's still alive." Hugh Matthews, a giant of a man, hastened to the prone intruder and bent to bind his hands behind his back. "Are you hurt?" Jacques asked. Varric pulled his clothes straight. "Nothing a few bandages won't fix." "Good." Jacques frowned. "More will follow." "We can't be sure they informed their superiors. Maybe they just stumbled onto the place." Jacques' frown deepened. "You know that's not true." He bit his lower lip. "He's too well hidden to be stumbled upon, and you know it." Varric sighed. "It's almost time. The harvesters will be here within hours, if our ancestors were correct." Worry lined Jacques' face. "Do you think our ancestors' plan will work?" "It will have to." What if the weapon doesn't work like it's said to? Varric closed his eyes and rubbed his temple. Then we will all die.